Welcome to the Mystery College podcast. Today we're doing an interview with Leigh Brasington. He's authored some amazing books on the Jhanas, on different forms of Buddhism. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be on. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So what got you started on your journey into Buddhism and meditative contemplative practice?
So I was introduced slightly to Buddhism in college. So the author of the book, The World's Religions, that was The Religions of Man at the time, Houston Smith, he came and gave a presentation. He talked about his time in a Zen monastery. And it was interesting, but I didn't do anything about it. And then I went around the world. And in Asia, I encountered Hinduism and Islam and Buddhism seemed to make the more sense, but I didn't do anything about it. So eventually, I was visiting some college friends, and one of them handed me Trungpa's book, Shambhala, and said, read this book. Okay. So I read the book. And then he said, you got to meditate now. Well, but that's so boring. What did Trungpa tell you? Yeah, okay. So I began playing slightly with meditation. And then my massage therapist was a student of Ruth Jennison. And she said, there's going to be a retreat down at Ruth. You should go. Well, I was unemployed and I had no excuse not to go. And so off I went. And it was Ayakema who became my root teacher. I went thinking that I already knew how to meditate, but I quickly learned that what I had been doing was not what Ayakema considered to be meditation. But she was a brilliant teacher. And I remember asking her a question at one point. I don't remember the question, but her reply was, oh, there's nothing to believe in Buddhism. The Buddha said, come and see for yourself. And that was the real turning point. Okay, I can do that. I want to know about meditation, but this religion stuff, no, forget about that. But here it was, well, it was like science. Come and see for yourself. And so that's what got me started. She also showed us the body scan, and the body scan was something I could do. I couldn't follow my breath. That was just too boring. But I could do the body scan, and then afterwards I could follow the breath. So I had a practice that I could take home with me, and that's what I did for the next 3 years.
Yeah, that's funny. I also found myself getting pretty bored with just following my breath at first, but like doing body scans, like say when I did like a 10-day Vipassana course, I found that like much easier for my mind to lock into.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And so what was like a pivotal moment in your practice with meditation, Buddhism, jhanas, where things started to click or switch or almost change your orientation of reality?
Yeah, there's two that were, well, I guess there were actually three that were really important. So after 3 years of body scan, follow the breath, I went on a retreat in Thailand at Wat Suan Mok, which is Ajahn Buddhadasa's monastery in southern Thailand. And they had a 10-day retreat this first 10 days of every month. And I showed up and it was all mindfulness of breathing. But by then I could follow my breath. And so, okay, this is good. And I stumbled into the first jhana about 4 days into the retreat. I didn't know it was the first jhana. I had the word piti. So I stumbled into piti, but it was actually the first jhana. And I went from meditating because I knew it was good to me to meditating because I wanted to meditate. I'd found something interesting. And that was the next 2 years. But I eventually realized that, hey, there's got to be more to this than just getting high. There's got to be more. And then one of my friends handed me a flyer, said, you want to do a retreat? This teacher's really good. And it was Ayakema, who I had not connected with in the 5 years intervening. And I was like, yeah, she was really good. I should sit with her again. Well, I go. First interview, she asked me, tell me about your meditation. I said, I can get to piti. She goes, oh, good. That's the second jhana. Here's how you do. It's the first jhana. Here's how you do the second. Somebody knew what was going on and furthermore knew what came next. And that was a real important thing. And by the end of that retreat, I knew she was my teacher. And I was back the next year, and that was 5.5 weeks of retreat. And by the end of the first week, I had learned all 8 jhanas. And she let me just play with them for a week or so. And then she put me to work doing insight practice post jhana. And that changed my life. with a jhanically concentrated mind, I got more insights in the remaining 3 weeks of that retreat than I'd gotten in the previous 6 years. And my friends could see I was different. And so that's when I fully understood, well, basically the gradual training, clean up your act, concentrate your mind, use your concentrated mind to investigate reality and understand what's actually happening. Those were the 3 biggies that took me from, just sort of dabbling in body scans to, all right, I understand what I'm supposed to do now.
Mm, amazing. And it's great to hear how that transformed that last 3 weeks of the retreat. And then sometimes a lot of people have challenges integrating retreat space back into their day-to-day life. So how did that transition back into day-to-day life? Being able to go into the second jhana and then have full absorption into things when needed.
Yeah, it was an easy transition, although, so from that first retreat, I actually learned 2, 3, 4, 5 with good access to first jhana. It was easy to learn some more. And so I went home and at first, no problem doing all 5 of them. And then it was getting hard to get to 5 sitting on my couch. And then it was getting hard to get to 4. But if I did a second meditation period set with a group, then I could get all 5. And it got more and more difficult for my morning meditation, because I'm not a morning person, to get to, maybe I was getting 1, maybe I wasn't getting anything, but I sat with a group and I would get all 5 of them back for approximately a year. And then I couldn't get the 5th one sometimes when I sat with a group. And then I went on that 5.5-week retreat, and that really helped. But again, it was the same thing. As time went on, it was harder and harder to get the higher and higher numbers. But I continued to do it because it just made sense. It just like, this is good stuff. And I could see that I was getting benefit from it. My parents could see it. They said, "You're so much calmer since you took up meditation." And I was like, yeah, it's really helpful. But we never discussed meditation any more than that.
But people are funny about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's touchy. And so, how would you define the jhanas for someone who's new to the concept in Buddhism, or maybe they're like Hindu and they're more familiar with the concept like samadhi?
Mhm. Yeah. So the Buddha said that samadhi, which is usually translated as right concentration, I would tend to translate it appropriate indistractability, or they are 8 states of altered states of consciousness brought on by concentration, and each state yielding even more concentration. This will allow you to stair-step your way down to deeper and deeper levels of concentration. So they are the warm-up exercise for investigating reality, insight practice. And they are specific states that have specific objects. And you need some degree of concentration to get to the first one. But luckily, when you're at the first one, it gives you concentration enough to get to the second, etc. So they're a way to get that indistractable mind so that when you start investigating reality, you're more likely to see what's going on. Plus, moving through the states has a tendency to shut down your ego construction. You're so focused, you're not thinking of yourself or anything like that. They're dualistic states, but the sense of self gets smaller and smaller. So when you come out to do your insight practice, you have an indistractable mind and you're looking from a less egocentric perspective. So there are states that enable you to do that.
Yeah, and one thing that comes to mind is for folks who may have never experienced full absorption into like a meditative state or a state of concentration with a single pointed object. Are there any reference experiences that people could relate to that first state of absorption?
I wouldn't say anything exactly like it. So first jhana, the primary experience of first jhana is a lot of physical energy, an uprush of physical energy, and an emotional sense of happiness. The physical predominates, the happiness is more in the background. And yeah, we've all had experiences like that. Your team wins the championship and you're all exuberant and jumping around and really happy, but it's brought on by something external. And this is brought on just by concentration. Furthermore, the amount of absorption that people experience varies a lot. You can get into the jhanas lightly. You can get into the medium depth. You can get into them really strongly. You can get into them to such a degree of absorption you have no idea what's going on around you. So depends really on your depth of your concentration. And most people haven't been in concentration depth that you'll get into even if you just get medium jhanas. You're working really hard on some project, but there's a thing out there you're working on. Whereas here, you're just being concentrated on a single object. And so the difference is remarkable in that you can stay with a subtle object, like, a sense of happiness, that's quite different from any sort of absorption you might have encountered in the past.
Mm, fantastic. Fantastic. And for folks who are like looking to develop their jhanas or deepen those states or drop into those states, like I like how you shared an example of almost a staircase where each of it's going downwards as opposed to upwards, right? Dropping in deeper. What are some ways that folks can start practicing these exercises? And also for people, what are the benefits in seeking out a practice group or seeking out an in-person teacher in person or online to show the ropes?
Yeah. The latter is mostly necessary for most people, to find a teacher and go on a retreat, preferably 10 days or more. Because when you go on a retreat, at first, you're really distracted. And after about 3, 4, 5 days, things settle down. And that's when you can start trying to learn the jhanas. Okay, so you got to get some real concentration. You got to quit arguing with your boss and planning your trip to Hawaii and all the rest of the stuff. So for most people, that's what it's going to take, is going on a retreat. I was shocked, actually, that when I started teaching on Zoom, people were learning jhanas. I just didn't think it would be possible, but people do. And so that's mostly what I'm doing these days, is teaching on Zoom. And it works. Learning them on your own is difficult. I have had people take my book, Right Concentration, on retreat when they're going on a 10-day retreat and sneaking and looking at it and finding the jhanas on their own. And I have had some people find them on their own at home, which just totally shocked me. I mean, when people said, you should write a book, it was like, nah, it's useless. Nobody can learn the jhanas out of a book. But as some people do, if you're going to try and learn them out of a book, you're going to need a really good daily practice. None of this 45 minutes, 5 days a week. This is going to be 2 hours a day, every day, an hour in the morning, hour in the evening. And then you've got a chance. You might be able to find the jhanas, but it's really difficult. I never learned a jhana except on a long retreat. And that's where most people learn their jhanas. But I've been shocked at the number of people that report, yeah, I got your book and I found them, whether they were on some other retreat and using my book or just doing it at home. It happens, but I would recommend going on a retreat with a teacher that knows how to teach jhanas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that there needs to be a context and a space where that level of a depth point can arise, where the mind is settled, that you need 3, 4, 5 days for the vacation to Hawaii or these other things to just drop off.
Right.
And for us to let go. So what are some misconceptions that people have about jhanic meditation going into it?
One of the misconceptions that people have is due to the fact there are a large number of varieties of what is taught as jhanas. So what I'm teaching is based on what Ayakema taught me and is based pretty much on the suttas, although I would say what the suttas, the Buddhist discourses, describe as jhana is deeper concentration than most people doing this technique yet. And then there are other people who describe less concentration or even barely any concentration. And then there are the teachers who teach what's found in the later commentaries, like the Visuddhimagga. And in those states, you are gone. There's no body sensations, there's no sounds, there's no passage of time. You are just completely absorbed and gone. And so one of the problems is you've heard stuff from all of these, and you don't realize that they're talking about actually distinctly different states. It's not the jhanas, it's their interpretation of the jhanas. So this is one of the things that happens. And another problem is that they have some idea in their mind of what they're going to find rather than just do the instructions. Two other problems that come up, and I warn people at the start of a retreat. One is if you have any expectations, you're in trouble, because expectations is the worst thing you bring on any retreat. But expectations are wanting. Wanting is the first hindrance. You must abandon the hindrances to enter the jhanas. So expectations are going to get in the way. And the other one is if you have any unresolved psychological issues, they might pop up. You get really concentrated and the energy you've been out holding that stuff down with is not there and it pops up. And yeah, I don't think I've ever taught a retreat where at least someone, and often more than one, find stuff coming up that they thought they'd taken care of or didn't know they had or whatever. It's like you go in thinking, yeah, this will be good. 10 days to meditate, 8 jhanas should be easy. No, it's not.
Yeah. I'm curious about like how like your professional career, if I read this right, you worked with computers at length, and I'm wondering how that as an analogy is brought forth insight or understanding to the jhanic process, like thinking about our brains or our body or processing energy sensations in that type of interface.
Yeah. Your exact question, I don't think it had that much influence, but it did have influence in that I was being paid big bucks to concentrate. I've been rewarded for concentrating ever since kindergarten. And when I got out and got a job, yeah, it was the same thing. You concentrate because the program, I was a programmer, but you have to concentrate. So I was exercising that muscle all along, and that helped a lot. But as far as learning the jhanas, I don't think anything other than my ability to concentrate was all that helpful. Now, it was very helpful when I started teaching because you have to give a computer very clear instructions or it's going to do some stupid stuff. It behaves much better than people. You got to give people really clear instructions and say it several different ways and so forth. So teaching, trying to be very clear about what people are supposed to do in the same way I had to be very clear when telling the computer what to do. Luckily, Ayakema was amazing with her clarity. Most anybody who studied with her, if you ask her about her teaching, they'll mention her clarity. And so I had it modeled for me how to be clear when giving instructions for this. But the ability to be clear, I think I learned from the programming. And the concentration ability, I kept exercising from the programming. But the actual nuts and bolts of writing a program, I don't think really moved over into my meditation. It's a different thing because there's a goal in mind. And when you're trying to learn the jhanas, you're just working to be concentrated. It's not any specific goal. And there's a lot of moving pieces going on, and you've got to think about this and that. Whereas with the jhanas, it's just one pointed focus all the way.
Deep. Yeah, it kind of made me think of like it helped in the instruction or prompting to students to cool their senses and focus in such a way to allow those jhanic states to arise at the various levels. That's what made sense to me. But the practice itself, there's not much, there's not all the gears and nuts and bolts and OS prompts to play with.
Now, it is buggy. I mean, when you're doing their bugs and when you're trying to teach people stuff, they've got bugs as well. Oh, no, that's not what I said. Or somebody finally comes in, this is their third retreat with me, and they say, when you said such and such, this is what worked. Why didn't you say it before? And I'd said it on every retreat I ever taught. It's just, in one ear and out the other.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, what are some, have you like half of your book was dedicated to like more in-depth Buddhist sutras, texts, scientific papers, brain states. I'm curious, what are some of the peak revelations from that you would wish folks who are into meditation, mindfulness, or doing a jhanic practice to familiarize themselves with for themselves or for communicating the practice to others?
I don't think it's necessary to know anything about the neuroscience of what's going on in order to learn the jhanas. I wanted to know about it because I'm curious. I have a scientific background. I mean, yeah, I was a computer programmer, but one of my pastimes is watching science documentaries on YouTube, math documentaries, etc., engineering. So yeah, I wanted to know what was going on there, but I don't think you have to know or even be curious about what goes on. One of the things, however, that's very interesting, so they found that second jhana, the reward center, the nucleus accumbens in the center of your brain, gets very active. The nucleus accumbens is activated by dopamine and it pumps out opioids like serotonin and so forth. And so what you're doing is learning to self-stimulate happiness. You're sitting down in a neutral mind state, perhaps, and making yourself happy, not because of something that happened outside, but because you know where the button is to punch to make the happiness come up. And so that's quite interesting. And having an understanding of how it functions, how, for example, to get into the first jhana, you need to focus on something pleasant and not disturb your focus on something pleasant, because that will set up a positive feedback loop. People know positive feedback loop. If this was a microphone and I held it up to the speaker, it would make that awful noise. That's a positive feedback loop of noise. You're trying to generate a positive feedback loop of pleasure. So you're focused on a pleasant sensation, and being focused on a pleasant sensation, if you enjoy it, that's pleasant, which adds a little more pleasantness. Well, the fact that it adds a little more pleasantness, that adds a little more pleasantness, and now you're setting up a positive feedback loop. So the understanding of how we're triggering the first jhana with a positive feedback loop of pleasure makes it easier for me to teach it. You don't need to know that as a student, but it may be helpful in that you realize, oh yeah, there's nothing really to do but focus on the pleasant sensation and let things take care of themselves. We tend to be human doings rather than human beings. And so you don't do anything but enjoy the pleasure. And so knowing about that to generate the PT, and then knowing that the PT, which I think is dopamine breaking down into norepinephrine, the symptoms of norepinephrine are very much like the symptoms of PT, movement, heat, etc. And knowing that dopamine stimulates the nucleus accumbens gives me a sense of what's going on. I'm setting up a positive feedback loop of pleasure that stimulates my nucleus accumbens, which pumps out neurotransmitters that make me happy. Second jhana.
I love it. Love it. Yeah, and having the brain and talking about dopamine, serotonin, or norepinephrine, terrible with that word, it gives a much greater context.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand like a lot of those three chemicals in particular are often some of the most targeted chemicals in pharmacology or pharmaceuticals, and also they're the most targeted things for recreational drugs like alcohol for serotonin and dopamine, or like stimulants, coffee. So like, what do you say, or what's been your experience with students who maybe on like stimulants or taking certain stuff, if it's not for like something medical, but more recreational? Like, how has that been doing this type of practice and transitioning into self-creating these things and having like a positive feedback loop? And where does that place substances or sex or other types of things that are, according to the five precepts, are less than ideal?
Right. Well, sex is not forbidden in the five precepts.
Yeah, like thoughtless.
Yeah. But sex that causes harm is definitely forbidden.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, the drugs. So I came and was really She was very helpful on that first retreat because at the time I was a pothead. I was stoned 5 nights a week and had been for like 14 years. So, okay, I'm not going to smoke. It'll be good for me. That cough might go away if I'm going to be on this 10-day retreat. And then she said, we are confused enough already. We don't need to ingest anything that makes us even more confused. Well, I've always wanted to know what the heck is going on, right? And if I really want to know what's going on, I need a clear mind. And so I quit smoking pot. And that was very helpful for a lot of things. But cleaning up my act was definitely useful. And probably the fact that I hadn't been smoking pot and doing stuff like that made it easier to stumble into the first jhana when I went on my next retreat 3 years later. So people who come in doing substances, well, you take the precepts at the beginning of the retreat. You're not going to be doing your substances. So is there going to be some withdrawal or anything like that? It may not be physical. It may be psychological withdrawal. Okay, so that's going to get in the way. If you're clean coming in, then maybe it's not a problem, depending on, if you're a frequent recreational mind-altering substance user, whether it be alcohol or drugs, it's probably going to make it more difficult. If you've done it in the past and you do it occasionally, it's probably not going to be that big a deal. And interestingly enough, the entry into the first jhana is quite similar to the first rush on pot. You go from a normal state of consciousness into something else. And there is a feeling of things going out of control. This is because things are going out of control. All right. If you smoked pot, when things start to go out of control, it's like, oh, this is familiar. Whereas if you've never done that, it's like, oh, I'm going out of control and there's a pullback. So I can tell often whether somebody in their past has ever used recreational drugs by how they respond as they get close to entering the first jhana. Those who've done them before, it's not unfamiliar. They're coming on to a substance. And so they're familiar with it and they don't freak out and block it. Those who haven't, or for some other reason, start to freak out and pull back, what I tell them is, okay, yeah, well, you have to stop doing that, but don't worry about it. Do it again and you'll get a little bit further next time before you freak out. And then you just keep doing it. And eventually you'll get to the point where you arrive and you realize it's perfectly fine and it's no more a problem. And I've had a number of students do that. So there is a similarity. We're fooling with altered states of consciousness. And yeah, that's what drugs are about, fooling with altered states of consciousness. So there's the similarity there. And having done so in the past can make it easier to make the transition without freaking out. But I'm not recommending anybody take up pot smoking so they can later learn jhanas. People do learn them without ever having done any mind-altering stuff. Ayya Khema, she was born in 1923. She never did any of that stuff, so, and she was much better at the jhanas than I'll ever be.
Yeah. It also made me think about like say people on their phone scrolling through Facebook, or they're watching short video feeds, and then it goes swipe. And sometimes I get caught in that loop too, because apps are being more and more engineered to be as addictive as possible against our best wishes. So and I notice when I fall into one of these loops for 5, 10, 20 minutes sometimes, like how my quality, my consciousness is just depleted. Like I might have gotten a lot of little tiny bits of dopamine, right? But it's nothing like the depth of like a first jhana meditation, or that quality of pitta from a good meditation set. Like that is none of that. It's just it's so shallow. But when it's presented, it's like it's very intoxicating.
Yeah. We evolved to get the dopamine hits when we got something that was useful for us, okay? Found some berries, whatever, okay? But we have now hijacked that part of the brain to get cheap dopamine hits for stuff that's not useful. And it takes wisdom to recognize it. Scrolling Facebook is not really useful unless maybe, okay, I've got 5 minutes to kill and then I'm going to do something useful, but I can't do it yet. And so I'm going to scroll Facebook for 5 minutes. But the trick that I use, my phone, I have to pay for all the data. Okay, so if I'm not home, do I really want to scroll Facebook? Well, obviously not, especially since I have a Kindle on my phone and I can be reading the book that I'm reading currently. So putting something in there that's more interesting and useful than mindlessly scrolling Facebook or watching reels or whatever is one way to, it's not stop doing that. It's do something better than that. And then when I'm not at home and don't have Wi-Fi, then yeah, I'll turn it on if I need an Uber. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. And so I've got a Kindle book there that I'm reading, and I always have a Kindle book going on my phone, or I have a book in the car. So if I'm waiting someplace in my car for an appointment or something, I can read it.
Yeah. That sounds good. Like, let's see. I'm wondering about like folks who, and it probably doesn't happen often as much since you've got quite a readership, viewership, and people who are familiar with your works. But like, how does it come up when someone may approach the jhanic practices or meditation with skepticism? How is that typically handled?
I don't get many skeptics coming on my retreats. I get people, they've heard about the jhanas, they want to do that. It sounds interesting, sounds maybe even fun. So, yeah, I get skepticism from people that aren't on retreat that I'm talking to. I'll get that occasionally. Oh, my teacher says they're not necessary. And of course, my response is the Buddha called it right concentration. You've probably heard of the Eightfold Path. Number 8 is right concentration. Seems like it might be quite kind of useful. So I have that to put out to people, but I don't get much contact with skeptics about the jhanas in and of themselves. I do get contact occasionally with somebody who, for example, thinks that what is described in the Visuddhimagga is the real jhanas, and I'm just doing jhana light. And okay, so these are deeper states. That's great if you can do them. But my response is, why attempt to do something that you never managed to do and never gain any benefit from doing when you can do something else that you can manage to do and get benefit from doing it? In other words, the subtitle of the book, a practical description of the jhanas. It's the practicality.
Mm.
I wanted to entitle the book Practical Jhanas, but the publisher had another idea.
Yeah. Practical jhanas. Yeah. So like, what was that train of thought? Let me gather my thoughts. Oh yeah. For spiritual experiences, like there's lots of different Buddhist texts that allude to very transient, subtle body experiences, or that can occur that naturally occur from meditative states. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, like if they are deeply beneficial or can they prove distracting in practice, and so on.
Okay, so I want a little more information about the subtle body states. Are you talking about the psychic powers?
Yeah, like psychic powers or spiritual experiences, either that arise from your mind conception, or things that may be perceived as like not arising from our perception alone.
Yeah. Yeah, the ones not from 5 sense perception, knowing the minds of others, hearing sounds at a distance. I put that under psychic powers. Yeah. So this is in the suttas. You find it. So in the book I wrote on the gradual training, I go into detail about them. And I do talk about it as well in the right concentration book on the jhanas. But basically, there's a list. And the first in the list, when it gives the full list, is the mind-made body, which, yeah, it could be out-of-body experience. But in talking with one of my students that I became friends with in Portugal, he was into lucid dreaming. And he said there's a technique called wake-induced lucid dreaming, where you go directly from a waking state into a lucid dream without having to fall asleep, recognize that you're dreaming, and then enter into a lucid dream, which is a dream where you know you're dreaming. And of course, in a lucid dream, you're supposed to do things like fly through the air, walk on water. Oh, wait, that sounds like the psychic powers, the supernormal powers.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that the mind-made body is learning the wake-induced lucid dreaming technique, and the walking on water, flying through the air, all those things are just lucid dreams. And there is a sutta number in Anguttara number 3.60, where the Buddha and a Brahmin are discussing miracles. And for the first two miracles, walking on water, flying through the air type, and knowing the minds of others, the Brahmin says, but this only benefits the one who does them. Their private experience is what it sounds like, which matches. And then there are places where the Buddha says, just don't even bother with that.
Mm.
The hearing sounds at a distance and seeing and knowing the minds of others, that's ESP. Whatever ESP is, we know we have the phrase extrasensory perception, but what is it? Well, science says it can't find it, but we talk about it. And so is it just not being able to do math properly and something, that the odds are sooner or later you're going to know something? Or is it picking up subtle cues? We don't have to know that. Whatever it is that we talk about and call ESP is enhanced by being concentrated. Whether you just, block some of your probability or you're picking up more subtle cues, it does seem to be enhanced. Or maybe there is something scientific and science can't measure it. I mean, science knows it has limitations. And then the remembering past lives and beings, seeing beings passing away and re-arising according to their karma, which is another of the psychic powers. I like what Stephen Batchelor said. He said, basically, the Buddha is saying, not taking it literally, but saying, look at who you are. It's arisen from all this that's happened in the past. And look at the fact that your actions are going to have some impact on the future, as opposed to you being an isolated individual doing your own thing. Get the big stream of what's going on from the past and the streams you'll be putting out into the future. And he phrased this in a way, in a culture that was very into multiple lifetimes. And so he could phrase it that way to get people to begin to understand. In his deepest teachings, he's basically saying, if you really understand the teachings, you wouldn't be running back to the past, wondering what I was, or running to the future, what will I be? It just won't come up.
Yeah, I really like the explanation of using expedient means of his lifetime as well to explain these concepts.
Right.
Thought slipped again. Yeah. So one thing that came to me was the idea of in mythology, that in a lot of cultures, mythology, a lot of these types of grandiose stories or mythological characters were not taken so much literally, but as mnemonics or things that illustrated truths that are beyond objective truth, but that are truth in a archetypical sense. So I'm wondering how that might expand to some of the stories we might hear about some of these jhana states, or like the siddhis or other things that are characterized throughout the thousands of years of Buddhism, where people do these practices where they have a lot of these extraordinary states attained through meditation.
Yeah. So we do get extraordinary states, but they're extraordinary states of clarity, I would say. Yeah. If someone can walk on water, I'll believe. I just want a demo. No, and not a YouTube video. It's too easy to fake. But yeah, the states that come from the jhanas are states of extraordinary clarity for investigating reality. People report all sorts of stuff. Maybe it's mythological. I mean, the supernormal powers, the psychic powers, show up in a lot of suttas. Is this just simply to encourage people? Yeah, this is really good stuff. You can do this if you really work hard, to encourage them to work hard. I don't know. There's a story about a Tibetan who studied with a master and learned what his master had to say. And his master said, okay, go practice on your own. And so he goes away and he practices for 20 years. And in those 20 years, he learned to walk on water, to go and shortcut into town on alms round, right? Yeah. And then one day he's in town and he hears his teacher's coming for a visit, and he gets all excited and he goes back to his cave and spits it up or whatever. And his teacher shows up a couple of days later and they have a joyful reunion. And then his teacher says, well, what have you learned? And he walks down to the river and walks across and turns around and walks back across the water and comes back to his teacher all smiling. His teacher goes, you just wasted 20 years of your life. There's a bridge a half mile upstream. So all of this psychic miracle stuff, don't waste your life pursuing that. When we know for certain, if you get a concentrated mind, you can understand more deeply what's going on. Once you understand more deeply what's going on, you have a better chance of letting go of the craving and clinging that gets you into all the dukkha, all the troubles you get into. And that much we know works. Indeed, mythological stories can be helpful. Sometimes I make up a story to tell people, but it's so obviously made up. But, it's just a teaching tool to get people to think about something. And so it's quite valuable, but don't take it literally.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was younger and I had a younger sibling, 10 years younger than me. And me and my other siblings would tell him, "Hey, if you read books, you're going to grow taller." like he's the tallest because he reads the most books. And we told him we lied about that for years.
Yeah, that's a great teaching thing. Right. Yeah, sometimes that's what it takes to get somebody to do something. There's a story about the Buddha's half-brother who wound up being a monk when he really wanted to go home to his fiancée. And the Buddha says, "Heard I go up to the Tashita heaven?" "Yes." "Let me tell you about the nymphs in Tashita heaven." And he tells him about the nymphs in the Tashita heaven. "If you practice hard, I can guarantee you 500 nymphs. Would you prefer the 500 nymphs or your fiancé?" "Oh, I'll take the nymphs." And so he goes and practices hard, but the word gets out that he's practicing for the sake of nymphs. He's embarrassed. He goes into the forest. He becomes enlightened. Comes back, tells the Buddha, forget about the nymphs. Yeah, there's stories like that. Now, I cleaned the story up because the actual sutta says he took him to the heaven. But I'm guessing it's just two guys talking about women and convinced him that there were nymphs available, and he practiced hard. And so the choice the Buddha had really was let his half-brother go back to his fiancée or feed him this myth, story, whatever, encourage his practice, and he wakes up and becomes fully enlightened.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I guess in another sense, there's already mythological story structures that are told in modern society that some are great, good stories for us, some are bad, but it just kind of parallels that these stories already exist within our reality, whether we accept them or not.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, what are some last thoughts you might have about the practice of jhanas, or for folks who are like curious about this, who want to start this journey but are not quite sure about the next steps? Maybe they're like, "Oh, do I buy your book? Do I join a practice group? Do I just have to jump into a retreat straight away?"
It helps if you have some idea of practice before you go on a retreat. Okay. There are beginners classes online even. So if you've never meditated before, find a beginner's class and go get some instruction. You're basically looking for something to get your mind quieter. And then go on a retreat. The first retreat, you're not likely to find any jhanas, even if you go on a jhana retreat. In fact, to come on my retreats, you have to have set 2 1-week or longer retreats. Just the first retreat is you're learning about what it's like to go on a retreat. The second retreat, you're learning it's not what you thought. By the third retreat, you're ready to start. And I have had a number of students, this is their third retreat, and they're learning jhanas because they know how to do a retreat. Yeah, they've got good concentration skills. So learn to meditate, and maybe going on retreat is the thing. If I had not gone on the retreat, I would not have learned to meditate. It took 7 days for me to get something I could take home. 7 days of, probably we were meditating 7 or 8 hours a day. Yeah, nothing was sticking until the 7th day of the 10-day retreat. So, yeah, going on a retreat as your first meditation experience does work. I have lots of students, their first experience was going on a Goenka retreat. Goenka teaches you, it's boot camp. Not that I think they can take you into the jhanas. They don't. They don't know anything about the jhanas. But it'll get you started. And there are plenty of other beginner retreats where you can learn to meditate. Or, find somebody that's teaching it. So once you've gotten some skill at meditation and you've gotten some skill at going on retreat, then the best thing is, Go on a retreat where jhanas are being taught. You could try and learn it from a book, but I'm going to say save your money and go on a retreat. Even if you don't learn jhanas, you'll get some benefit from going on the retreat. If you buy my book and you don't learn any jhanas, you'll think, it's a waste of money. So I'm not trying to sell the book. You may find that, you buy the book, you read it, and it's helpful, and then you go on a retreat. That might be one way to do it. But I would say that my book would be a secondary thing, and going on retreat would be the primary way to learn.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And are there any communities or other resources, websites, or ways to stay in the loop with you that folks can do?
Well, I have a website. It's leighb.com. There's a reading list there. There's stuff on the jhanas. There's essays. I started this 1996. It's one of the oldest sites on the web. It's got all sorts of stuff in there. It's got stuff about computers. It's got a packing list for a long trip. It's got, pictures from my travels, things like that. It started out as just, everybody's making a website on GeoCities. I'll make a website on GeoCities. And what am I going to put on? I got a few essays. And I could put, I'm going to be teaching this retreat. I could put that on there. That was my first retreat, was in early 97. So put that on there. And it's just grown ever since. So there's that. There's not much else specifically about the jhanas, but there are tons of sites out there. In particular, there are recordings, both from Dharma Seed and Audio Dharma, that have lots of really great talks by really great teachers. So any teacher you've heard of, you probably find a talk by them on one or both of those. Check them out. There are, if you want to get scholarly, there are places like sutracentral.net and Access to Insight, where you have translations of the sutras and essays by other people that are quite interesting. I found that really helpful. And there are a lot of other Buddhist websites that have really good information on it. Some are linked from my website. And I can't keep up.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for doing this. It's good to get the information out there. Maybe people can find it useful. That's my hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely.